Well, I think we should all get underway. Good morning to all of you. Welcome. I want to remind you, first of all, I'm glad that you're here, but I want to remind you that you have something awaiting for you next week. And that's when the author of our text, Professor Christine Hayes from Yale University will be here and will be addressing you. And I certainly hope you'll all accept the invitation that I extended, that each one of you is entitled to invite one person to come with you next week to give them the opportunity of having that pleasure.
Rabbi,
yes?
Is there a certain topic she's going to be discussing?
There is no question in my mind that there is. There is equally no question in my mind that whatever it is, it's going to be worth hearing. Okay? I hope I've reassured you. Now, today we're going to talk about King David, Part 2. Part 1 was, of course, the way this young man ascended to the position of being the commander serving under King Saul of the Jewish people. And then we talked about how bad feelings developed between David and King Saul out of a growing sense of jealousy on the part of Saul, and also a feeling that it's a feeling that was very strongly developed, and of course it came true, that the dynasty that would rule the people of Israel until the very end of the kingdom of Israel would be David's kingdom rather than Saul's kingdom. So finally, the relationships became so bad that David had to flee to escape the occasional outbursts of anger on the part of Saul. The personalities of Saul and David are highly developed in this wonderful story that was created in the Bible. Both David and Saul were truly human beings. And by that I mean human beings, all human beings, are subject to ups and downs in their feelings. Times when we feel on top of the world, and times when we feel in the depths of despair and sorrow, depending on what's happening. But even more important, depending on what's happening in your mind, not necessarily in reality. We're going to start by a vivid example in the Bible of this phenomenon. A phenomenon that Saul, unfortunately, was subject to very often. But I want to say that the same was true of David in a very real sense. When we first encounter David, basically he's a caregiver. He plays music in order to soothe the troubled spirit of Saul. There are times when David is very tender, very loving, very kind, and there are times when he behaves like an animal, very unpredictable.
Rabbi, how old is David at this point?
Well, as I mentioned, I think the question was raised last week even. Age is never mentioned. We have no idea. All we can tell is that he appears as the youngest of 7 brothers. And they describe him as being ruddy-faced, and he's whatever age you want to talk about. He can be 15, he can be 25. Yes?
I think your son was correct when you told us that it's just irrelevant.
Right.
It's just irrelevant.
I want to confess something to you. Because in terms of how I feel, there are times when I feel like 97, and there are times like I feel like 17. It's a fact. I'm not sure which is better. But the point is the age is something that's almost totally not a factor. We certainly know that David is much younger than Saul, because David's best friend is Jonathan, Saul's son. So David flees from Saul. Saul repeatedly has hurled a spear at David, and only because David was so agile, he was able to escape. But he knew that sooner or later, that's not going to happen. He's not going to escape. So he decides to flee. He flees to a place in Palestine called Nob. You know, there is an area in Portland called Nob Hill. I wouldn't be surprised if that knob in Nob Hill comes from the name Nob in the Bible. He comes to the priest there, and he can't tell him that he's running away from Saul, but he whispers to him, "I'm on a secret mission from Saul. And I need some things from you. I had to leave very quickly. So I need some food to take along, and I also need to take a weapon." Now here comes the skill of the storyteller. For some reason or other, that temple or that holy place in Nob had become a kind of a Jewish museum. And in that museum was the sword of Goliath. So the priest tells David, "Well, we don't have any weapons here, but in our museum we have the sword of Goliath. Do you want that?" David said, "Sure, just what I want." Such a symbolism in that, as we'll see later on. The sword of Goliath is the symbol of David's victory over Goliath. With that sword, he cut off Goliath's head, which was the deed that brought him to the leadership under Saul. So off he goes with that. And Saul pursues him. One night, both of them find shelter by sheer chance in the same cave. There are a lot of caves in the southern part of Israel. Caves have played a very important role in Jewish life. I remember going once on an expedition, an archaeological expedition in Israel, in the area of the cave where they found the ancient writings, what's it called, the Dead Sea Scrolls. They were found in a cave overlooking the Dead Sea. So you have large, extended caves there. And David went into the cave at the furthest end of the cave. That same evening, Saul and his entourage come for shelter in the same cave, closer to the entrance. Neither is aware of the presence of the other. David wakes up, starts to look around, and lo and behold, there is Saul in that same cave near the entrance. Saul, who is pursuing David with the purpose of killing him. So what does David do? David tiptoes quietly, cuts off the edge of Saul's robe that was lying over him as he was sleeping, and gets out of the cave quietly. After he gets out of the cave far enough, he shouts. And if you want to follow this, you can read it in Samuel 1, chapter 24, verse 9. After that, David arose and stepped out of the cave, calling after Saul, saying, "My lord the king," like an alarm clock. He wakes Saul up. Saul looked behind him, and David bowed down with his face on the ground and prostrated himself. And David said to Saul, "Why do you listen to the words of someone who says, 'Behold, David seeks to harm you'? Why are you pursuing me? Did somebody tell you that I'm planning to do anything wrong to you? Behold, this day your eyes have seen that God delivered you unto my hand in the cave today. I could have done anything I wanted to you. God delivered you to me. You understand that now. And although someone said to kill you, in other words, some of my own people said, 'David, you've got him. Kill him, get rid of him. He won't pursue anymore.' My soul took pity on you, and I said, 'I shall not send forth my hand against my Lord, for he is the anointed of God. See now, my father.'" My father. Look at the term that he uses. He regards him, in a sense, as his spiritual father. "Indeed, see the corner of your coat that is in my hand. For since I've cut off the corner of your coat and have not killed you, you should know and see that there is no evil or rebellion in my hand, and that I have not sinned against you. Yet you hunt my soul to take it. May God judge between me and you, and may God avenge me from you. But my hand will not act against you. As the ancient proverb says, wickedness issues from the wicked, but my hand will not do anything against you." I could have so easily, but look. After whom has the king of Israel gone out? Whom have you been pursuing? After someone as insignificant as a dead dog. Why are you exerting yourself, chasing after me? It's like you're chasing after a single flea. What eloquent language he's using. May God be an arbiter and judge between me and you, and may he see and take up my grievance and vindicate me from your hand. That's his speech to Saul. Brilliant writing. Some of the speech makers of today should take lessons. And it was when Daniel finished speaking these words to Saul, Saul said, "Is that your voice, my son David?" And Saul raised his voice and wept. He said to David, "You are more righteous than I. You have repaid me with goodness, while I have repaid you with wickedness. You have proven today that you have done only good with me, for God delivered me into your hand, but you did not kill me. Does a man find his enemy and then send him off on a good way? May God repay you with beneficence for what you have done to me this day. I'm convinced. May God repay you with beneficence for what you have done to me this day. Now behold, I know that you will certainly reign and have kingship over Israel. Shall be established in your hand. So now swear to me by God that you will not annihilate my descendants after me, and that you will not destroy my name from my father's house." Total reversal. Saul says to David, "You have been so good, and I have been so wicked. You are going to be the king, and your descendants will be the kings. Just always remember my descendants and show your kindness to them." This swing of feelings is what goes on here time and time again. No sooner does David leave than Saul immediately picks up his men and starts pursuing him. Catch him before he escapes. Then David does a desperate thing, something totally unexpected. He said, "This will never end. I only have one way out." So he takes his group of about, I hear different numbers in the Bible, 400 or 600 people. "And I'm going to join the Philistines. They're going to be thrilled to have me. I was the one who led the Israelites in a successful battle against the Philistines. Now I'll join the Philistines." But even at the beginning, he had a clever plan. Really, only, as I said, a master storyteller could conceive of this plan. He comes to Achish, the king of the Philistines, and he says, "I've got a little army with me, and I'm willing to put them at your service. fight battles for you. I'm not asking you for anything, but I'll do this for you. What a deal. Achish immediately took him up on it. You got a deal. Then, what did David do? He had his own command. And that was part of the deal. I will fight battles for you, to Achish, and bring you spoils of victory. And you don't have to do anything for me. That's better than any trade deal that you can think about. So he does lead his people in a series of battles. Against whom? Against the Ammonites, the Amorites, the Moabites, the Edomites, all of the enemies of Israel. And he takes part of the booty that he captures from them and sends it back to Achish. And he sends part of the booty to King Saul, to Israel. Now that's a deal. Everybody is happy with him. The Philistines are happy. Israel is happy. He's happy. What could be better? Then comes a problem. Achish says, "You've been very good. Thank you very much. Now let's go attack Israel." Now David has a problem. If he doesn't do what Achish wants him to do, he will lose his base of operation. If he does do what Achish wants him to do, he will have lost any hope of ever becoming king of Israel. So, what will you do? If you were put in that position, what would you do? Well, I want you to think about it. That's really what all I wanted this class, is to get you to think, not to solve the problem. He said to Achish, what?
Go fishing.
What?
Go fishing. Leave. Go fishing.
What?
David should go fishing.
He couldn't get away with that. No, he said to Achish, okay, I'm going to join you against Israel. Knowing that Achish has a council, a war council, and we know what they're going to do. They're going to tell Achish, you can't trust David in a fight against Israel. You can trust him to fight against anybody else, but you can't trust him to really remain loyal to you. And Achish finally agreed, and he said, you're fired. You're not going into this battle. You go ahead and do all the other battles that you've been doing, which I liked. But My generals are not confident that you're going to do a real job against Israel. He's off the hook. The Philistines attack without David, and they're beaten back. And David now totally on top of the world. And it continues that way until the news reaches him that in the battle with the Philistines, that Saul and Jonathan were killed in battle. Died in battle. Then comes one of the most beautiful laments in Samuel 2, chapter 1. David took hold of his garments and tore them, as did all the people that were with him. They lamented and wept and fasted until evening over Saul, over Jonathan his son. And David lamented this dirge over Saul and Jonathan. O precious one of Israel, upon your heights lie the slain. How have the mighty fallen? Saul and Jonathan. Do not tell it in Gath. Do not spread the tidings in the streets of Ashkelon. These are all Philistine cities. Lest the Philistine girls rejoice. Lest the daughters of the uncircumcised jubilate. O mountains of Gilboa, let neither dew nor rain be upon you, nor fields of bounty. For rejected there was the shield of the mighty ones, the shield of Saul, as if unanointed with oil. From the blood of the slain, from the fat of the mighty, the bow of Jonathan would not recoil. The sword of Saul would not return empty. Saul and Jonathan, beloved and pleasant in their lives, and in their death not parted. These are some of the most heartfelt emotions that we find in all of the Bible. Now, we can readily understand his feelings about the death of Jonathan. But equally with that, he speaks of Saul as well, in spite of the fact that time and time again, Saul has attempted to take his life. That's, again, part of the master story of the book of David, of the book of Solomon, containing the story of David. Now I want to talk about, for a short period of time, about David's life during this whole period. Actually, a little bit before what I just talked about the Philistines, because it's an interesting story. David is the captain of this company of men going all over the southern part of Palestine, living off the land. In other words, they weren't farmers, but they were like the mafia. Wherever they went, they took payoff money in order not to harm the people, the wealthy people who are living there. So he comes to a very wealthy Hebrew, Israelite, named Naval. And the names in the Bible are not haphazard. Naval is a nasty person. The word Neveh means something ugly. Who was married to a lovely woman by the name of Abigail. So David sends a messenger to Naval, and he says, I've got 400 men with me. I'm at the border of your plantation. If you would like to have a peaceful life and continue to be wealthy and happy and healthy, we need a certain number of, a certain amount of food, a certain number of cattle, of enemies, which we know you can well afford. Naval predictably responded, what, I've worked in order to provide you? Forget it. You want to come and take it? We'll fight it out. Abigail hears what's going on, and she is much wiser than Naval. So she goes ahead and, unbeknownst to Naval, collects all of these demands of David, packs them up, and sends them to David. And she goes with it. And she gets off the animal that she was riding, and there's no doubt in my mind that he was quite impressed with what he saw. And she pleads with him on the ground, please don't attack us. You're right, and I brought you everything that you asked for. Just leave us alone. David was very pleased with her. First of all, she's acting very sensibly, and she's quite beautiful. He said, for your sake, I will do it. I'll accept what you brought me and regard that as a payoff. So she went back to her husband Naval, and she said, in a way, I'm just rewarding it myself, darling, I've got good news and bad news. The good news is that this man, David, is not going to attack us with his band, and we're going to be able to carry on without any problems. The bad news is that I felt it was safer to do it that way, and I just collected what he demanded and sent it to him. He turned around to her and he said, "You what?" And she said, "I did it for us, dear." At which point, he has a heart attack. He has a heart attack. David comes in to the camp anyway and proposes to Abigail. And she delights at the opportunity. There's several things in that story that strike me. One that has particular reference to the big story that we'll talk about in a minute. All he saw of Abigail was in the context of the story which I just shared with you. But David was a man of impulse. For him, love at first sight is no problem. He saw Abigail, he liked her, he liked the fact that she had a big property, which was now available to him, and he married her. And she remained his wife. And we know afterwards the number of children that she bore to him. Well, after he finally does get back to Israel, after he leaves the Philistines, when he no longer has to worry because Saul is now dead, he becomes the king, of course, and he captures the city of Jerusalem and builds a palace and so on. I'm combining a lot now because we don't have that much time. But this big story, of course, that everybody knows about is the story of Bathsheba, which is the same sort of thing as Abigail, only more so. The Bible describes how David is in his palace on the roof, which is higher than the roofs of the neighboring buildings. And of course, he sees Bathsheba bathing in the sun, nude. And immediately falls in love with her. Now, what does love mean to him? He sees a naked woman, and all the Bible says, he sends over his man to get her, to bring her over, and sleeps with her, which he can do as king. Now, that could have been the end of story. The unfortunate thing is, then he finds out that she's a married woman. She's married to the Hittite, Uriah the Hittite. Now, it's perfectly all right for a king to take a woman, but a wife involves complications. So again, we all know the story but I'm going to come to the point that I want to read. We all know the story that he arranges for Uriah the Hittite to be killed in battle. What we may not remember is this. He had learned a valuable lesson from Saul years earlier on a matter that I did talk about in our class. Remember the story when Saul says to David after the battle with Goliath, and he offers David his daughter in marriage. But he says, I want you to bring a wedding gift. What was the wedding gift that he asked for? 100 foreskins of Philistines. Now, what did he need 100 foreskins for? He didn't need them. But David understood immediately why he demanded that as a wedding present, knowing in his mind that if he sets out to bring back 100 foreskins, the Philistines sooner or later will kill David. That was the whole idea. So David says to himself now, with Bathsheba, she has a husband, and I don't want to be involved at all. I don't want my name associated. I just have to arrange for somebody else to kill him. The arrangement is that Job should put him in a battle, in a situation where the Philistines will kill him. My hands will be clean. So that's what he does. But what the writer of the story does with this, again, is, I thought, so well done, and in such a way that we hardly pay any attention to it. Look at chapter 11 of Samuel 2. Let's take a look first how it starts. Verse 6 of chapter 11. David sent a message to Joab. Send me Uriah the Hittite. That's all. I want to see him. He's an officer. So Joab sent Uriah to David. David came to him, and Uriah inquired after the welfare of Joab and the welfare of the people and the welfare of the warriors. Making conversation. Uriah comes to him and he's talking. David then says to Uriah, go down to your house and wash your feet. What's that all about? Well, there are other parts in the Bible, particularly the book of Ruth, where we learn that this phrase, wash your feet, means conjugal relations. He doesn't mean, it's a polite way of saying that. Look, you're a soldier. You've been fighting a battle. Go home to your wife and wash your feet. Whether the wink accompanied that phrase, I don't know. So Uriah left the house of the king, and a royal feast was sent after him. But Uriah lay down at the entrance to the king's house, along with all of his lord's servants, and did not go down to his house. Now, that's a loyal soldier. Oy vey. Spoiled David's plans right off the bat. David can then always claim that whatever would come of his relations with Bathsheba was Uriah's, not his. Now he can't claim that anymore. So David then said to Uriah, all right, stay here tonight also, and tomorrow I will send you off. So Uriah stayed in Jerusalem that day and the next. Then David summoned him, and he ate and drank before him, and he made him No, I'll just skip one line. And it was in the morning that David wrote a note to Joab and sent it by Uriah's hand. Again, that's the touch of the skilled writer. He writes a note to Joab and asks Uriah to deliver the note. And what does the note say? Place Uriah directly in front of the fierce fighting, and then withdraw from behind him, so that he shall be struck and die. That message now is going to be carried by Uriah, his own death notice, to give to Joab. Now, if that is not drama, I don't know what drama is. So it was that when Joab was besieging the city, he stationed Uriah in a place where he knew that the powerful warriors were. The men of the city came out, fought against Joab, and some people from arriving from among David's servants fell, and Uriah the Hittite also fell in that battle. You would think that's enough. The plan has succeeded. But Joab covers up the tracks in such a clever way. Totally unexpected. You have to read it to believe it. Listen. Joab sent and told David all the matters concerning the war. This is a full report of what happened. Incidentally, This is how fake news can be made. This is what their version of fake news is. Listen. He sent and told David all the matters concerning the war. He instructed the messengers, saying, "When you finish telling David all the matters concerning the war, if the king anger flares up and he says to you, 'Why did you draw close to the city to fight? Did you not know that they shoot from on top of the wall?' If the king gets angry and says, 'Joab conducted the war poorly. He exposed his soldiers to danger.' Why did he do it? And then he says, 'Who killed Abimelech, son of Yeruboshet? Was it not a woman who threw a millstone over the wall so that he died?'" That's a story that we read in the book of Joseph, and the book of Judges, that this warrior of Israel got too close to the wall that they were attacking, and a woman dropped a jug from that wall and fell on his head and killed him. It's dangerous to come close to a wall to fight. Why did Joab do it? So if Joab says that, see, "Why then did you draw close to the wall? Then you should say," and now I'm adding 3 little words, but they're implied. "Oh, by the way, your servant Uriah the Hittite died." You know, among the soldiers that died was Uriah. That sent a clear message to Joab, and yet that phrase wouldn't mean anything to anybody who reads the report. That's fake news. The whole battle was being fought in order to kill Uriah. But actually, a number of Israelite soldiers died. And oh, by the way, and Uriah was one of them. Uriah was the afterthought, whereas Uriah was the thought. That's fake news. That's the cover-up. And see, the storyteller didn't have to add that. But it's a wonderful piece of writing to indicate the horror of what David did. But David didn't do it. Joab did it. Now, what's interesting to me, oh boy, I'm not going to say we're going to have chapter 3 because we're not. We don't have the time for that. But I will have a little bit of chapter 3 in 2 weeks after next week's lecture. But I do have to stop now. So anybody want to have a comment or a question? I would urge you to read the story yourself and really search out all these little details that you might not have noticed otherwise.
So, Rabbi, I'm
Yes.
curious to
What?
I'm curious to know why from the previous chapter about the death of Saul, more isn't said about the fact that he fell on his own sword
He fell on his own sword.
to avoid being killed by a Philistine.
Right.
So was that a common battle tactic of people who did not want to be known as killed by the enemy?
I'll tell you what went through, what in my mind, what went through his mind. The enemy, in Saul's mind, overwhelmingly was the Philistine. They were the number one enemy of the Jewish people. He refused to accept the fact that he could be killed by a Philistine. I would rather take my own life rather than have it taken by those people. You have to try to understand a mind like Saul's. But I think that was at the heart of his thinking.
But his sons did not do that. They actually were killed in
Right.
battle.
His son was not sick in his mind as he was. His son fought to the end.
Thank you.
The mind is a curious instrument. And that's really what the story is mostly about, looking at people's minds, how they think. The mind of David is so strange, how he can be at one time the sweet singer of Israel and another time the conniving murderer. Okay, well, next week, you're in for a real treat. So look forward to seeing you then. Please don't.